Welcome back to the CTO Playbook, the podcast dedicated to helping CTOs excel. I'm your host, Adam Horner. With 30 years in the industry, including over a decade as a CTO, I have coached and mentored more than 100 engineers and tech leaders. This podcast covers crucial topics for CTOs, providing insights, strategies, and practical advice to help you excel in your role. In this episode, I'll be speaking to Andy Skipper, a seasoned CTO coach and the founder of CTO Craft, which is the world's biggest CTO community. We talk about the importance of coaching for CTOs, and Andy tells the story about how the CTO Craft community came about. Keep listening to learn Andy's 2 big tips for any CTO who is stepping into the role for the first time. Andy, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here today. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well, thanks, Adam. Yeah, it's been an interesting couple of weeks. Lots going on at this end. Lots of big plans, but no, it's good.
Yeah, it's been busy building up to the summer, hasn't it, with people just about to take their holidays off?
Yep, indeed. Yeah, trying to squeeze everything in before everyone disappears.
That's the way. So can you share a little bit about your background for our listeners so that they understand sort of a little bit of the journey that led you to founding CTO Craft?
Yeah, of course. So I'm an engineer by background. It's fairly typical journey to becoming a CTO. I was a developer, and then a senior developer, and then a team lead, and then CTO by default in the first tech startup that I worked in. Then had various CTO level roles, including Made.com, which was a designer furniture retailer that did very well, and IPO'd a few years ago, and Comic Relief, which is one of the bigger charities in the UK, and then became a fractional CTO. So I was working for multiple clients at the same time, either on an advisory basis or as their sort of interim CTO, and found that a lot of the work that I was doing as an interim or as a fractional CTO was actually supporting or taking over from another CTO who was struggling or had failed or wasn't able to do the job in the way they needed to. So I found a lot of the work was actually coaching CTOs or coaching the relationship between CTOs and the other leadership people in the business. And so coaching became my main focus from that.
So it's almost like a natural evolution then from being fractional to realizing that coaching was the way forward.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And not saying that that's the right path for everyone. It was certainly the right path for me. It fit my preferred way of working and the kind of people that I wanted to work with. So yeah.
Cool. And so in terms of your coaching then, when was it that you sort of realized that actually the coaching is something that gives you more, I don't know, fulfillment or passion or what was the moment when you suddenly thought this is it?
It's a really good question. I don't think there was one specific moment, but then certainly when I was leading teams as CTO and or as fractional, my approach to leadership was very much people first and very touchy-feely, I guess. As opposed to very engineering first and very kind of structured for better or for worse. But certainly coaching was a huge part of how I led people when I was leading teams. So it was a bit of a natural progression from that, really.
Right. And I've got to ask, because it was probably one of these questions that's going to be on every listener's mind, is did you transition through a VP engineering role on your way to CTO? Or was that something that was just skipped?
No, it was skipped. As I said before, I was made CTO by default in the first startup that I had that kind of role in, purely because there was nobody else who was capable of leading teams, managing the projects, etc. And I was most senior developer as well. So it kind of happened by accident.
Excellent. And a lot of people sort of think of the VP engineering as being the touchy-feely one. But I guess if you just jumped into the seat, it doesn't matter what you call it. You're there and you're there to look after people. And I guess your instincts take over at that point. Is that what happened?
Yeah, I'd also say it's a factor of being a very small team. I think at that point, when I became CTO, the team was maybe 4 people.
Right. So classic, very early stage startup then.
Very early stage startup. So no room for two tiers of leadership, I suppose, at the top of the engineering team.
Yeah. And did you ever get coaching yourself? Did you have coaching that made you think, oh, I've had a great coach, so that's going to inspire me to be a coach?
Eventually. Not at that company, but I certainly did in future companies. And when I started fractional work, I had a coach then as well. So yes, in other words, I have had a coach.
Awesome. And so in terms of the benefits of coaching then, I mean, obviously people come to you for coaching through CTO Craft and through other places now, but how do you describe the benefits to CTOs of coaching?
So I suppose the people who come to us for coaching typically have one of a handful of different sets of challenges. So they'll either come because they've got specific gaps in their leadership knowledge, or there are known unknowns that they want to fill, essentially. Or there are people who are in crisis mode and they have communication problems with other leaders, with their teams, or the team's not delivering, so on and so forth. Or there are people who are personally burning out. And a lot of the work that I do as a coach is with CTOs who are burning or have burnt out. But then there are also people who just want a consigliere, is basically what I'd call it. So basically a sounding board, somebody that they can rant to who doesn't have any skin in the game with the company that they're working in, and know that it's confidential and get feedback or support or whatever else.
So the outside ear, effectively.
Indeed. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, because in my coaching, I also see quite a lot of people who are at sort of, I'm drowning, help me stage. But there's sort of everything's going on fire. And I don't know which fire to put out first. It's probably the most frustrating one as a coach, because you're thinking, if only you'd called me, a month, 2 months, 3 months earlier, we could be in a very different conversation right now.
There you go. I suppose the thing is, there's always going to be a new fire to put out. So the best time to plant a tree is now. Or no, rather, the best time to plant a tree is 15 years ago. The second best time is now. So, yeah.
That's a good phrase. I love that one. So you mentioned burnout. You mentioned people who are, everything's on fire. They don't know which thing to sort out first. You mentioned the sounding board. Are there any other sort of broad categories that people fall into when they suddenly think, okay, I need some coaching?
So a lot of brand new leaders come our way. So a lot of people who recognize that, having come from being an individual contributor, there are just a bunch of skills that they either won't have been exposed to at all in the case of people who come from early stage companies, or they just want additional help in the same way that other leaders within their teams are getting from executive coaches or marketing coaches or whatever they've got.
Oh, right. So you do see some of that jealousy across the executive team then. The CEO's got a coach. Why can't I have one?
Well, no, it's never jealousy, actually. I don't think we've ever had that. It's more that the CEO has felt the benefit of having one, so they've told the CTO to go and find one.
Oh, right. Excellent. Okay, so that is the natural support. It's almost the best way to have the support for coaching. That's fantastic. I personally haven't encountered that one yet. I wish I'd encountered that more. Because I think one of the things that is slightly frustrating is when you see somebody, you think, okay, you could really do with coaching, but there's no expectation on CTOs. I find in a number of places that coaching is okay, or that coaching is expected even of the role.
Yeah, no, that's totally true.
And is that something that's changed over time, do you think?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the last few years have certainly seen a bit of a shift in mentality there. I think it's also a cultural thing. So in Europe, I think expecting a technologist to have a coach is probably less likely than to find the similar thing in America. It's much more widespread in Northern America from my experience.
And so by Europe, you're meaning UK, Europe as a whole, the whole continent, basically?
Yeah, the whole continent. I don't think there's much difference between the UK and Sweden or Germany or anywhere else, to be honest. But in the States, they will just throw money at it.
Yeah. And so do you think that's one of those cultural things that's slowly being imported across the Atlantic then, like many other of the great inventions that we have?
I don't know if it's being imported. I think it's more that company founders and CEOs are warming up to the idea of investing in oneself and investing in the team a little bit more. So it's not that they're copying what they're doing in the States. And I don't think it'll ever be an equal level of investment and so on. But certainly people are more open to thinking about building on their self-awareness and their emotional intelligence and setting themselves goals outside of the work environment. So yeah, I think that's it.
And do you see, because one of the things I'm seeing as well is where the referrals come from shifting slightly, because it used to be often the CEO or somebody else underneath them reporting to them saying you should get some help. But now I'm beginning to see outside pressure as well, whether it's from investors, from the board, or even from external mentors who might suggest, coaching might be a good route for you to take. Are you seeing a shift in that as well?
So the vast majority of people who come our way are self-referring. So they haven't had any pressure put on them by anyone except themselves. But the people who do come having been given some pressure from above, it's typically the CEO. The VC level people and the boards and so on, I find are less likely to pressure people into spending money on something like coaching. That might be a UK bias, but certainly so far it's almost always the CTO themselves that are referred in.
Cool. And so in the coaching process, you mentioned about the reason that people come to you. And clearly, a lot of the times you're going to go, well, that's what I'll focus on first in terms of the coaching approach. I'll help you solve the challenge that you're immediately feeling. Do you see commonalities in terms of the unpredicted or unexpected benefits that coaches say, that CTOs say to you after coaching and say, wow, I never imagined that this would be such a great thing about coaching, but this is what I've experienced?
Yeah, I'd say so. So people have certainly referred to improvements in their personal lives, having done CTO coaching with us. I think that's partly because at least the coaching I do, I can't say this is true for all of the coaches in the CTO Craft pool, but a large part of it is emotional intelligence and self-awareness and self-acceptance, and confidence and imposter syndrome and communication strategies. And those things do filter out of the work environment as well, So certainly some people have come back with that. Other people have said that it's improved their understanding of how other people work, what other people's motivations are and what their hang-ups might be and where they might have come from and that kind of thing. So yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's limited to just one person in one role in one team by any means.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things that you mentioned there about understanding the way that other people think and the way that other people communicate. Often one of the things I find with coaching as well is that the benefits begin to ripple out from the CTO as they are able to themselves kind of take on an element of, improved coaching for the people who report to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Part of the leadership role is being a figurehead and a role model, right? If you can demonstrate to your team that you are trying to make changes in terms of how you communicate with people and how you manage yourself, manage your own workload and so on, then it does trickle down. Yeah. Sometimes you have to tell them that those are the changes that are happening, but it does trickle down. Yeah.
Definitely. Cool. And in terms of the different kinds of coaches you have at CTO Craft, because you mentioned your approach, but there is a pool of coaches. So are you able to give us a bit of an idea of the different sort of range of different coaching styles that you've got within the pool at CTO Craft?
Yeah, for sure. Typically all of the coaches, they straddle the line between coach and mentor. So they're not just helping people understand themselves and help them set goals and so on and so forth, but they're also bringing context-specific experience that they can use to guide people down a certain path if they're trying to resolve a certain set of problems or whatever. The differentiator between the coaches, I suppose, is around their industrial experience. So, we have coaches who are very focused on smaller companies, very early stage. Then we have people who have built teams from 10 to 500 and have that experience of scaling and, organizational design, all the other stuff that comes along with it. And then we have people who are very e-commerce focused, and then we have people who are so on. And then obviously we have splits between where people are in the world. So we're able to match people up by time zone and that kind of thing.
Right, because I guess time zone is pretty important for helping people, at a time that works for them.
Yes, very important.
As well. So time zone, geography and time zone are really the same thing, aren't they? By sort of the industry or vertical that they're working in there, but then also by the style, I guess, in terms of how they approach it, whether they're more coach, more mentor. Do you differentiate between coaching and teaching at all, or is it sort of coaching, mentoring sort of the spectrum for you?
Yeah, so I would substitute the word training for teaching. And I'd say training is something else we do in CTO Craft, but it's not typically part of the coach/mentor relationships that we set up. That's much more about getting people out of specific holes at a specific time. But we do offer training. We have courses. We've got kind of skills-focused learning paths and so on in our campus platform. But no, the training typically stays out of coaching and mentoring.
Right. Okay. So that's a distinction then. So if you want to learn something specific, a specific topic, go search for training rather than for coaching. On the other hand, a coach can help you get out of a hole, but you might be missing some knowledge that you need to level up in order to get clear of that mess.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Cool. And so in terms of, one of the challenges that I sometimes face with some people when I say to them, hey, have you thought about coaching? And they go, oh, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And then the next question they have is, well, how do I justify it to my CEO? How do I convince my boss that coaching is going to be actually a good thing and a benefit? Is that something that you encounter as one of those sort of, I don't know, let's call it an objection?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in the earlier stage companies that we work with, budget is a key constraint. From my own personal practice, my own coaching practice, as I said before, a lot of the stuff that I do is around burnout and, people about to hit the red zone and need to just stop for a while. But also there are a lot of people in the red zone who are causing damage to the rest of their team by working through burnout. And so that's quite commonly from the stuff that I do, what I take back to CEOs and say, look, without some kind of external support / intervention / conversation, having this CTO in place is going to burn them out personally, which is horrible, but it's also probably going to cause lasting damage to the company and the team. And, you can do your own sums and figure out what that will cost you in terms of, lost revenue, having to replace people, et cetera, et cetera. And that typically is pretty powerful. I think where people want more generalized support, the conversation is more around confidence and skills and the ability to communicate better with the first team and with the CEO. And that generally speaking goes over pretty well. But so far, it hasn't been a huge challenge. The people who are self-referring, they don't tend to find much pushback.
Yeah. And I guess they've got the motivation to help justify what they want to get for.
That's it. And by and large, they usually already have by the time they come to us. And then obviously the people who are being referred in or pushed by their CEO already have buy-in.
You've got the buy-in by default in that stage, haven't you? And you mentioned there's a very interesting phrase, which I love using a lot, but I think other people sometimes struggle to figure out. But you mentioned they're the first team. I know what it means, but I'd love you to just explain that for our listeners so they understand what we mean by that.
Of course, yeah. So the concept is from Patrick Lencioni, and the idea is that your most immediate duties are actually to the other people on the same level as you. So that if you're a CTO, it's the other people in the senior leadership team and not to the people that report into you. The common mistake that CTOs make in their first role is focusing all of their attention on keeping their team happy and making all of their conversations with other functions and with other managers and the CEO tainted by trying to protect who's in their team. And so building that understanding that the people that you need to be focused on in terms of needs and care and conversation and so on are actually the people in the other functions helps build more commercial awareness. It helps understand other parts of the business. It improves relationships between other parts of the business and other people within your team as well. And it's just hugely important, very commonly left aside by brand new CTOs.
Yeah, sort of a common stumbling block that the people who report to you are your primary importance rather than thinking about the business and the leaders of the business. Cool. Thank you. It was a very clear explanation. Thank you. I hope that helps clarify, especially for some of those first-time CTOs who are wondering what that meant. And so I think when we talk about coaching and people coming to you, I think it's probably important to sort of segue from there into why or how people come to find you in the first place, because I've been a member of the CTO Craft community for a while. But I mean, let's talk about community, because I think community is one of those things where I think, in my experience, a lot of CTOs, especially first-time CTOs, don't really know where everybody else is and sort of don't know where to turn to find people like them. The old expression, it's lonely at the top, it can be quite real and quite in your face when you first become a CTO and suddenly there's nobody else like you for you to go and turn to and talk to. So how did the CTO Craft community sort of come about? Was it literally just as an evolution of you bringing people together to coach them, or was there something more specific to it than that?
Yeah, so originally it was a group of people that I was coaching in London. And then when we branched out beyond one-to-one coaching into mentoring groups, the numbers grew because they were all members of these groups. And it's just grown organically from there. But yeah, originally it was so that there was a place where people could see that there were other people facing the same kind of challenges and share their stories essentially.
And so before you created that, were you a member of other communities that you sort of used as, I don't know, maybe as a template or as inspiration?
Absolutely, yeah. So I was a member of 2 communities, plus a couple of communities that were run internally to VCs that backed some of the businesses that I was involved with. So I'd seen the power of bringing together people within a portfolio, but then I'd also seen other slightly differently formatted groups that were also for more senior, more experienced CTOs. So there was nothing really for people just stepping into the role, and nothing at scale, and nothing beyond what was in a portfolio of a VC. So yeah, it was quite novel at the time.
So therefore, your experience was sort of quite limited to those, almost literally a closed group, because one VC doesn't necessarily really at all want to talk to another VC about who they've got in their portfolio and which CTOs are there and so on.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, there were a couple of communities that I wasn't really part of that were run by recruiters and outsourcing companies and so on that were, they were positive places, but they were obviously kind of tainted by being run by a recruiter who also had services to sell and so on and so forth. So it's a little bit different.
Cool. And I guess, so if you started it from there, how long did it take to get to the point where you felt like there was some sort of, I want to say the word critical mass, but maybe that's not a very good word in here, because as soon as you got a small number, you've got enough people to be able to share experiences. But at what point did you know it was really taking off?
So we actually started it in 2017, and we ran it as a sort of a growing entity, I suppose, for about a year and a half, and then set it aside. So I stopped to focus on some other stuff that I was doing, and it grew organically. And then when the lockdown hit, suddenly it exploded because everybody was stuck at home. Everybody had no way of really interacting with other people at their level and so on. So that was a real kind of trigger moment. But the momentum didn't really slow down from there, and still hasn't. So, we've doubled pretty much in the last 18 months. It is all so far organic, and it's all word of mouth, and people referring others in, or seeing events that we're running, that kind of thing. So we do very little marketing, if any at all. We don't have a marketing function.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely identify with the COVID trigger. I think that was about the time when I started looking around to find other CTOs and found CTO Craft sometime at that point during COVID. Our company was one of the earliest ones to sort of lock down the doors and stay, working from home. So it was something for me at that point in time of just seeing and hearing from others. That's definitely where I came across it. So, but it's interesting that the community itself sort of created its own momentum at that stage. So even when you sort of stepped back and didn't push it, it literally just continued to grow on its own, and still is, by the sounds of it.
It is. It does need some involvement from me and other parts of the team to keep the engagement up, to make sure that we keep giving people useful content and resources. But by and large, the growth and the conversations in it are all organic, and people are self-moderating. I'll immediately get a number of alerts if somebody does something out of line, and it's great. It's a nice community. It's a safe community.
I can definitely attest to that one. So what do you think are probably some of the main benefits of being a member of the community? Why do people come along and join?
So I think a lot of people come along because they need some kind of validation. That the challenges they're facing are not completely isolated to them and their experience, but also just to get other people's points of view and get people's feedback, get people's recommendations, that kind of thing. When we run events, when we run conferences, the biggest buzz is always around the hallway track and the conversations and the, people just finding out what being a CTO is like for other people. And, in a community as big as CTO Craft, there's just an endless number of different experiences and insights to swap. So I think that's why most people join.
Yeah. So the validation point is interesting, because I think that is, is it just me? I think it's a question we all ask at some point when we end up with that, the shadow on the shoulder, where, sort of the self-doubt, the imposter syndrome kicks in. Am I going crazy, or is somebody else experiencing the same thing? And I have to say, while I've never asked one of those questions in the CTO Craft forums, I have to say that it is very enlightening, the other kind of, I guess, admissions that will come forward when somebody says, is this just me? Because people are very open and sharing, aren't they, within the community? And I think that's what you were saying about it being a safe space, that people feel okay to share those things there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, it's something we've always strived for, is making sure people understand that it's all the conversations in there stay in there. And, there is no judgment. People who, happens very rarely, but people who do judge others based on the stuff that they put in there are usually exited pretty quickly. So, it's just a friendly place where you can get non-judgmental views on what you're doing or what you're not doing, essentially.
And so I guess that is obviously very clearly curated and managed by you, and I assume by others as well. But I have to say, the code of conduct is probably one of the clearest of all the communities I've ever joined. Was that all you're doing? Or was that sort of also input from others?
The writing it into a Word document was my doing. But no, getting the views to actually put in there all came from the community or from, people who are strategic advisors to us who run other communities and conversations at events, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I can't take.
So it really shows you've leaned on the best practice there. So I guess taking a leaf out of your own book, I'll get coached on the best way to do this and do it that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely working. So how do you think then? So let's say, for example, there's a relatively new CTO stepped into the role. They join the community. Other than helping them get over, is this just me kind of questions, how do you think a new CTO would make the most of being a member of the community as somebody who's recently joined in?
It's a really good question. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to that. I think, some people will be overwhelmed by being in such a kind of high position for the first time, and they may just want to lurk and watch what other people struggle with, what other people know about the role, et cetera, et cetera. Some people might have specific answers that they need, specific questions rather, that they need answers to quickly. It's one of the best things about the CTO Craft community. If you put a question up or something you're struggling with, you'll typically have 10 to 15 answers within 20 minutes. I think other people just want to know other people in the same role as them. I think it's as simple as networking. People do use it heavily for just meeting other people, especially in their own areas. Now we're running the mixer events that we run in lots of different cities, which you know all about, Adam.
Yes, yeah. Being a host of one of those, it's So I'm the host for the Gothenburg and the Stockholm one as well. But we've sort of glossed over it. It's probably worth talking about the events because there are different kinds of events that CTO Craft run, aren't there? So can you just give us a quick rundown on those different kinds of events and the relative scales of each one?
Yeah, of course. So the mixers are fairly new. We've been doing them for about 5 months, I think. But they're really informal networking sessions over some kind of refreshment, alcoholic or otherwise. We're running them in Sweden, as you say, Adam. We're running them in Germany and Bulgaria and Ireland and obviously the UK and Canada now and France and all over the place. I think there's one coming up in Boston shortly in the US as well. So
is that the first US one then?
There we go. And they're very, very popular. People do sell them out very, very quickly. They're all run by advocates like yourself, Adam, from the community. The one in Toronto recently ended up with about 113 people there, I think, something like that.
Wow. Big attendance.
Just for drinks and networking. So it was brilliant. So those are the mixers. We do bites, which are like panel events, basically, where we have people on who are subject matter experts in something or other, and they either do like a fireside chat or they discuss something between a big group of people about hiring or, performance management or cloud cost optimization, et cetera, et cetera. And the recordings of all of those are all on YouTube. They're lots of people watching those. Other than that, we do conferences. So it's something at a slightly bigger scale. We had our last London conference in May, and that's fairly standard stage. Lots of great speakers, big hallway track, as I said before. We also do round tables and get people together to talk about specific subjects. Lots of stuff going on, lots of stuff.
Yeah, the conferences are absolutely unique because I think you've sold out every single one of the conferences you've done so far, haven't you?
So far, knock on wood.
And I happened to make it to the most recent one, which was absolutely fantastic. As you said, probably the single biggest benefit was actually the people you meet around the actual talks and events. A lot of the talks are very high quality and, some really, really good content, but it was meeting the people in the industry. Some of them people I'd already been chatting with online for, in one case, over a year, and then met them for the first time in person. And it was absolutely fantastic to literally be in the same place as a bunch of other CTOs. Because as far as I know, there are no other major events specifically targeting CTOs. Do you know of any others?
No, there are some add-on events to other things. So you see big expos with a CTO track, which is slightly less, but I don't think any of them are optimized for that networking and serendipity and all that sort of stuff. I think we're the only conference that does that, really.
It's a great place to be in a unique space. I mean, I think every startup would love to be in a unique space.
There you go. Well, we've got another coming up. I'll drop my plug in for Berlin. We've got a conference in Berlin and at the end of September. So do come along if you're around.
Yeah, that's definitely what I'm looking forward to as well. Trying to sort out my travel arrangements at the moment to be able to make it there.
Brilliant.
Cool. And so one of the things I'd love to ask you about then, in terms of a new CTO, if you were talking to a new CTO and you could give them just one piece of advice, what would that be in terms of how to make the best of their new role as a CTO?
So it's difficult because it depends on the company and depends on the size of the team they're picking up. I think if it were somebody who has moved up the ranks within a company and, they're moving into a leadership role and they've got, 30 people underneath them, whatever, my immediate advice would be to get out there and talk to the first team, coming back to the first team, and just find out more about the rest of the business, because there's a very solid chance that in coming up the rungs, you have been very focused on what's happening in tech and how that works and optimizing for that. And when you get to the top levels and you need to be more commercial, more strategic, you can't do that without spending a lot of time talking to the other functions. And so that's my first advice. I think second piece of advice would probably be to not take yourself so seriously. Getting into a leadership role, you put a lot of expectations on yourself, but you also assume there is a lot of expectation from outside on you as well, which isn't always true. More people want you to succeed than want you to fail. I think a lot of people who get into it for the first time don't understand that. So yeah, I think those are probably the two biggest ones. Like they're very, very varied though from the coaching work that I've done.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm trying to summarize that. So spend more time with the other executives in the top level team of the company, which is where your primary team is now. And then the other one is to take yourself less seriously and remember that other people's expectations of you are probably less than your own expectations of yourself.
And they more than likely want you to succeed.
That's a really good tip to remember, that one. Andy, how can anybody get a hold of you if they're looking to get in touch with you, join the community, or to find you online?
Sure thing. My name is my name on LinkedIn. So easy enough.
You're one of the few who's unique in that way then.
There we go. And CTOcraft.com is where to come to find out all about the events and the community and the learning and the mentoring groups that we run and all the other stuff.
Excellent. And so by joining the community, you can find out when the local Mixer events are as well. Although there's a great website on events.ctocraft.com, which I can also recommend. Tiny little plug for my event in Sweden if you're somebody who's in Sweden as well. But the events website is where you can find all those events too. CTOcraft.com and linkedin.com/in/Andy Skipper. Brilliant. Fantastic. And Andy, I'd just really love to thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing all of your insights and your experiences. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. To our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out CTO Craft and the incredible resources that are on offer there. And remember to subscribe to the CTO Playbook for more episodes packed with valuable advice to help you excel as a CTO. Until next time, stay innovative and keep leading with impact. Thank you very much for listening all the way through to the end. Just before you go, I'd like to ask you for one thing in return for putting together all these episodes of the CTO Playbook podcast for you. Please leave a review. Wherever you're listening, whether that is Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whichever platform you're on, leaving a quick review will help more CTOs find the podcast and enable me to create more great episodes. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the CTO Playbook.